From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Hello again. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis, and as usual, a lively conversation about things going on in the news. The city got good news. It has passed the blizzard test, so we'll be talking about that, I know. When I picked up the paper this morning over at my favorite 7-Eleven, the woman who was cashing out said, "That's crazy. They didn't pass anything. They didn't pass it in my neighborhood." So we'll talk about that. But we start the program off today with a new feature, a brand new feature, where we offer an award of valor. And today's award of valor goes to Lisa Schrader, who is a PR person for the Department of Budget for the city of Chicago. She wins this award for valiantly serving the cause of city public relations when she said, and I quote, "If the spot is clear and the meter is clear, people should pay the meter as they normally would." In other words, we're not going to give you a ticket. The cops aren't going to be looking at this. The meters are just not working. You can't get to them. But you really, as a good citizen, should go out there and pay the meter. See, that's what PR, that's good PR. So congratulations, Lisa. You're our first award winner of valor. Joining us today, Sam Hudzik is here. Sam Hudzik, political reporter for Chicago Public Media, WBEZ. Glad to have you back again. Sam, thank you. And joining us today is Dick Kay, back on the beat after all these years at WCPT Radio, and of course, political editor at Channel 5 for God knows how many years.
38.
Only 38 booths counting. So we got a number of things we want to talk about today. We do want to talk about the politics of snow, and we want to talk about the politics of politics and everything else. But I wanted to start with you, Dick, because you have a history, apart from your journalism. You've also been a union activist for a long time.
Yeah, still am.
And still are. So I want to know, when did things change in Chicago to the point that a leading candidate for mayor, a guy who's polling 54% in the last poll, can be perceived as being sort of anti-union? I mean, aren't we supposed to be this pro-union city where the only way you can ever get elected is to have all the unions standing there behind you? And he's the guy who the unions are not standing behind. What happened?
Well, that's kind of a mystery to me. I think it started, first of all, we've seen kind of a gradual erosion under Mayor Daley. You know, he's had his problems with the unions, and it started with the last aldermanic election over the big box issue. And that's when the unions got involved and said, we're going to be active. We're gonna take out a number of the aldermen, and they did over the big box issue. Mm-hmm. But now along comes Rahm, and I think that he's taken it to a whole new level. A guy that sits in the White House and says, what was it? Basically, slam the UAW and slam liberals. You know, like that, yeah. Where are they going to go? Mm-hmm. You know, and mm-hmm. now he comes in and he starts talking about changing the pension plans. He starts talking about doing commercials saying, you know, this is not an employment agency. Mm-hmm. We serve the people. City workers serve the people. And all of a sudden, he's got these unions, labor unions, standing up with Gary Chico right. and saying, hey, you know, we do a lot of work. We recognize our jobs, mm-hmm. and they're endorsing Gary Chico.
But his numbers are the ones that are going up.
His numbers are the ones going up because I think people, first of all, think it's a good idea to say to city workers have been maligned over the years, and you know, in some cases, a lot of cases, they deserved it. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people see that commercial and say, well, it's about time, you know. Mm-hmm. It's about time. Let's make sure that we stop this patronage and we get these guys working.
Well, Sam, I wanted to bring you on this because there really does seem to be something has reversed itself. We've gone inside out on this, where Rahm Emanuel, I mean, there were a lot of eyebrows raised when those commercials hit during the snowstorm. Like, what is this? We get thousands of city workers out there trying to dig us out, and Rahm Emanuel's running a spot saying, you know, this isn't an employment agency. But it seemed actually to work. It seemed like people resonated with what he was saying.
I mean, I think he'd quibble with the characterization of it that, that this was an anti-union message. I think what we saw from him also during the blizzard, though, was a very careful statement that he put out involving snow, involving Lakeshore Drive, in which he commended the efforts of the city workers. So I think he sees the balance in that. And as you guys both pointed out, this wasn't necessarily, this message isn't actually hurting him. It's not as though he stood up and said in any overt terms, that I'm gonna, that I am anti-union, that I am gonna do my best to have fewer union jobs in the city or anything like that. I think it's a careful balancing act, but I mean, I don't see. Obviously he drew the ire of some of the unions, the most recent ad, but you could read it as him just stating the obvious,
Well, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, was this a political calculation? Did they do some focus work? Did they do some research and decide the mood of the city has changed to the point that you can really you can send a message that you are, if not overtly critical of the city workforce, you're not really on their side, and the public will like that?
Yeah, but remember, it was Rahm Emanuel who said, it's a crime to waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
I think this is very calculated. That spot is not necessarily anti-union, but he needed to find a way to talk about plowing the streets, and he found a very clever way to do it. He needed a way to talk about police, and he found a very clever way to do it, all in the same spot. And it hit home with a lot of people. I mean, look at the scandals we've had in political hiring in Daley's administration in the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? I mean, some of his best friends are going to jail, or some of his closest neighbors, let's put it that way. Al Sanchez going to jail. I think it was a very calculated spot to say that, we're not going to have any more of this. I mean, we don't have any more HDO. We're not going to have these patronage armies. We're going to make sure that even if they are, he didn't say patronage, but we're going to make sure that every city worker puts in an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and we're going to show that the streets are going to get plowed
and
too.
we're going to get the streets plowed too.
Very calculated.
We're going to be able to do all that and still give you police
and
protection.
It's not anti-union.
Yeah,
I mean, it's we're going to make sure it's anti-HDO. It's anti-political armies. But
so maybe having all the trades union people standing behind Gary Chico is actually working in Rahm Emanuel's favor.
Well, something's working in his favor.
Working. Well, let's talk about the numbers. The Channel 7 poll, ABC 7, right now, as of 2 days ago anyway, 54% for Rahm Emanuel, Chico 14%. That would sound like bad news because it's only about a quarter, but that's the best news is that he's in second place. Second place at 14%. What happened to Carol Moseley Braun?
Well,
6%.
That was the two takeaways from that poll, was that that Rahm was once again found above 50%, and that Carol Moseley Braun was so low. She was asked about that last night after the debate at the DeSable Museum. She called it malarkey. She doesn't buy it.
She doesn't believe it.
She doesn't buy it. No, she's had a tough few weeks though.
Yeah.
I mean, that she was beat up pretty bad over the Patricia Van Pelt Watkins situation at a forum where she said that Patricia Van Pelt Watkins was strung out on crack.
Right.
So I think it's been a tough time for Carol Moseley Braun. She hasn't really done anything in that time to change the conversation. No major policy proposals or anything to try to get people talking about something else with her candidacy.
Yeah.
That's what she needs to do right now.
Well, I heard her, in fact, on your radio station this morning talking, and I got the same impression. It's sort of like she's saying, well, I just don't believe that we're in fourth place. Well, okay, but when we're arguing over whether you're at 7% or 9% or 14%, the conversation has, for all effects and purposes, ended, it would seem to me.
It's gonna, I think, but I've also heard over and over again that Chicago is a difficult place to poll, and so much of this is going to end up being on turnout. And if a lot of people think that this is a foregone conclusion, then that could cut both ways.
Yeah.
Her past caught up with her.
Yeah.
I mean, she's in denial. She's been her own worst enemy. It's not just the Patricia Van Pelt Watkins snorting cocaine. It's I don't want to release my income taxes. I don't have to explain my finances. I got an advanced degree from Harvard, which she didn't. I mean, it's just her past just caught up with her. And now she's dropping. She was in second place. And Van Pelt Watkins has done a marvelous job around the city of saying, she's not the consensus candidate.
Right.
What, did she inherit it from when Danny Davis was a
Right.
consensus candidate and dropped out? Now she inherited it?
In fairness, she also said in that interview on WBEZ that this wasn't her process, that the consensus
right.
candidate
Right.
process
She did say-
wasn't
she did
her
say
mostly.
that.
She called
Well,
it a flawed
but
process.
how did that happen?
And
I mean,
interestingly
how did
enough,
she become the consensus candidate?
Well,
Danny Davis was the consensus candidate.
what's interesting to me about that is that everybody who participated in the consensus process is walking away from it, because
Right.
now today you have Walter Burnett, Alderman Burnett, who
Right.
essentially brought it together. He gave an interview to Mike Flannery on Fox and said that he kind of regrets the whole thing, and that he claims that he was trying to get interviews with Gary Chico and other people, non-African Americans, because I think there's an interesting pivot going on here now. The people who, at least to me, appeared to have been saying we're trying to find the consensus black candidate or African American candidate, now are saying, well, no, what we were trying to do was find the consensus candidate for the African American community, and whether that person was black or white or whatever. So
But they didn't get interviewed, right?
they apparently did not. Well, I guess we'll never really know. But the point is that it just seems to me like I think you could objectively call that process a disaster. I mean, when all the people who were working on it have kind of disavowed their own process. So you have a kind of a weird situation. I mean, but anyway.
Well, James Meeks was dropped out. Danny Davis dropped out. I mean, they were left without a consensus candidate.
Well,
I mean,
you know,
and it was a bad idea to begin with.
This actually raises something that I think we can have a very interesting conversation here, because we have two generations of political people sitting at the table here right now, and I find myself really fascinated by this, because now we have to be very careful about what we say here, because I promise you that I'm not saying this being critical of any one of these individuals, but I got a real feeling, a real sense from that process that we were talking about yesterday's generation.
That's right.
I mean, Danny Davis is a wonderful guy. I don't think anybody has too many bad things to say about him, but he's not the guy that you think of when you say, we got to move the city forward, we need new thinking and all that. And I find Carol Moseley Braun kind of fitting into that same category too. We're not even talking about age, we're just talking about whether you're talking about someone who kind of has that feel to them, like a Barack Obama becoming president. It's like, here's a guy who, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't even born when JFK was killed, right? So, you know, there needs to be generational shift, and that was missing in that process.
Well, I don't know if Senator Meeks fits into that category, though. I mean, he first ran for the Senate as an independent. You know, he with the backing of Jesse Jackson Jr. He was defeated in the Shaw Brothers, right? That was not from the same
Good point.
Angle as Danny Davis's past. But I mean, I think as we saw that process sort of unfold this fall, the fact that it was taking so long to come to a consensus candidate, and that you had diverging groups coming up with different lists of consensus candidates, showed that, you know, there wasn't a consensus, and perhaps that just wasn't something that was going to happen regardless of how the process took
Well, it also raises this other broad sweep of history question about whether it might be possible that we actually are kind of post-racial now. I mean, is it possible? When you see the numbers, African American support for Rahm Emanuel is it 53%? 53% in that Channel 7 poll, 57% for white. So I mean, it's almost the same.
And Jesse White, a very prominent African American,
who
right?
just endorsed
Rahm
Emanuel.
And
Emanuel
Hermine Hartman
yesterday.
today, and Indigo came out.
Right.
So I mean, you have you. Is it possible that we've just kind of gotten to the point now where we really don't care all that much about the color?
Well, several things have happened. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is generational, first of all. I don't think the anger is here that existed when Harold Washington won, for example. And secondly, those were some of the same people in the Harold Washington movement that were trying to put together this consensus, and they're sort of elder statesmen, if you will. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to listen to Jesse Jackson Sr. anymore.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people aren't going to listen to Danny Davis, and Carol Moseley Braun was what, 1992 or something like that? I think that there's a new generation of African Americans who are stepping forward. Some of them who have done fairly well under Mayor Daley, for example. And Barack Obama did a lot to close this divide, to close this gap. And what motivated those to elect Harold Washington a great deal, not only was he a good candidate, but there was a lot of anger. Remember all of the anger? Remember, it was the school board, it was the snowstorm, it was a Taste of Chicago, it was Chicago Fest, it was changes in the school board. It was, I mean, Byrne did everything to slap African Americans in the face. And now that doesn't exist, that kind of anger, and that's what will bring out the African American community to find a consensus candidate. I don't think that exists today.
It's actually had me thinking, kind of rethinking a little bit, trying to imagine 20 years hence, whoever is doing these conversations, Sam.
Won't be me.
No, it won't be me, but you will be talking about whether or not Richard M. Daley sort of presided over a generational shift and a shift in the zeitgeist of the city of Chicago. We can't tell it now, and our opinions are too biased at this point, but I'm beginning to wonder if maybe that is part of what it is.
I think he did. I think we can tell it.
You can tell.
No, I really do think he has.
Yeah.
Well, we also had a conversation on WBEZ earlier this week on 848 about how the candidates really right now aren't talking about segregation. They're not talking about race. Chicago is still a deeply segregated city.
Yes, it
and
is.
This isn't, so in that way, we're certainly not post-racial. And I think, I obviously all of the issues that the candidates are touching on, the budget, the economy, education, job training, those cut across all racial lines. I think perhaps race just hasn't been that big of a topic of discussion, and you know that's perhaps because the media hasn't brought it up enough. It's perhaps also because the candidates themselves haven't made an issue of it. Carol Moseley Braun certainly has not talked about race. Patricia Van Pelt-Watkins talks about it a lot more.
I recommend, by the way, the Steve Boguera piece in this week's Reader just came out, which, among other things, has some unbelievably just dramatic maps of the decades of the racial segregation in Chicago starting in 1970, and it basically hasn't changed. It's an amazing thing. But Dick, could we move on? Because we have limited amount of time, and I really want to get into this whole thing about this, the Blagojevich people saying that there might be a missing tape of a phone call that might or might not have happened, and implying that it might or might not have some implications for Rahm Emanuel. Is this just all shadow theater?
Well, first of all, we don't even know if that tape exists.
Or if the phone call was ever made.
Ever made. I don't know. I mean, Rod is fighting for his life. He wants to stay out of prison, and along the way, he's always said, "I didn't try to sell the Senate seat," and he's trying to show that there was probably show that Rahm asked for favors, and he was just trying to, honor the requests. I think that he's trying to make a case that he wasn't trying to sell anything. And of course, he'd love to he's tried to get the president and Rahm Emanuel into this trial.
Right.
And they won't let him do it.
And now it almost sounds like he's trying to bring Lisa Madigan into it, too.
Right.
Like, oh no, what are we?
Yeah. I was going to appoint Lisa Madigan. I was trying to swallow my pride, and I was going to cut a deal to appoint her to the U.S. Senate.
We saw that during the trial as well.
Yeah.
Alexi Giannoulias was the Democratic candidate for Senate, and his
Very
name
good
popped
point.
up there.
Right.
There's been a series of attempts by his lawyers, I have no doubt, are looking out for his best interests legally, but they're also very keen when it comes to publicity, and they know that at this point,
to writing the news
talking
cycle
about Rahm Emanuel
right.
is going to be big news. Just like over the summer, talking about Alexei Janulius was going to be big news, and anytime talking about subpoenaing the president would also be big news.
Did this now?
They would love to twist it.
Yeah. Now, Dick and I are sort of retired guys, and we can speculate on things. You not so much. But I wonder, I can't help but wonder how this whole thing happened, that the second trial got moved back to April, because if it had gone at its regular schedule, wouldn't Rahm Emanuel have been on the stand right about now?
I don't think they're going to call Rahm. I think that's what they're trying to do. I think Blagojevich and his attorneys are trying to get him to call Rahm. But I think that they did that deliberately to avoid this election, is my understanding, that they moved the trial.
Well, the trial was, on its face, the reason given for moving the trial was to provide the lawyers with more of an opportunity to prepare, because it was a different team.
But it also gave Rahm Emanuel the opportunity, if he could win it in the first round, to escape all of that publicity.
Or even really the second round, because the election was going to be April 5th, right? So very unlikely you were going to get into the thick of anything
before then,
especially testimony before
okay.
then.
All right. Okay. So, Dick, was there a meeting or a phone call, a conference call at some time with Bill Daley and Rich Daley and maybe, I don't know, Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel, and they said, the Daleys said, we've kind of decided it's time for Rich to move on, and we would like you to come back to Chicago and take this over, and we'll put Bill in your job. Did that conversation happen?
I'm not privy to that.
I didn't think that you were.
I mean, it is possible. I don't know if it's probable. Rahm, said a long time ago that if he'd like to run for mayor of the
city
of Chicago.
On the Charlie Rose show,
right,
on nothing less than national TV.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also said, but I'm going to support Mayor Daley.
Right. Well, of course.
And I think that obviously Rahm had a conversation with President Obama and said, I think the guy that you really want is Bill Daley. And after the last election, when he got shellacked, if you will, I think they decided that it was time to move to the center with a banker and with a guy from the financial sector, a little more conservative, And whether there was a phone conversation like that or not, I don't know. But Mayor Daley supported Bill for chief of staff.
Yeah, of course. But the thing that's fascinating to me is, just imagine for a moment that someone, I don't even know who it would be, but I don't know, Ed Burke or somebody managed to get himself on the Charlie Rose show on that very same day and say, boy, I sure would love to be mayor of Chicago someday. He would have been whacked within 24 hours. And we wouldn't even remember his name.
But Rahm was
today.
almost whacked, remember?
Yeah, but he wasn't.
He came back. When the media started hammering him, he was like, oh, no, I'm supporting Mayor Daley.
That's true. A few weeks after that interview, he came to Chicago to speak at the Richard J. Daley Urban Forum, and there was a media, I remember because I almost got knocked over and my head chopped off.
He was almost whacked.
And he was very careful, he was very careful with his wording to say, I support Mayor Daley, it's no secret that I want to return to Chicago.
Well, of course, he wasn't going to be critical of the mayor, but my point is
not at the Richard J. Daley Urban Cities
Forum. My point
Forum.
is that somebody gave him permission to go on that show and open that conversation up. That's my point. But
President Obama had to
give
give him permission to go on the show, unless Rahm is a little bit more bold than I think.
Yeah, well,
you don't do anything in the White House without talking it over.
All right, so down to our last couple of minutes, cavalcade of topics here. 73% of Chicagoans on the WGN poll last night said they were satisfied with the blizzard.
And they should be.
You think so?
Yeah. I do too,
by the way.
I think it's crazy. what I've seen are a bunch of whiners.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, we in the media help create that. Well, I'm not some folks in television because I'm not in it, but they help create
You
that.
were around
Let's go out to the neighborhoods and see if they're happy with their side streets.
Right.
Give me a break.
Right.
One day after they started clearing the arterial streets, they were out there talking to people. Well, my side streets haven't been cleared.
Right.
No, they haven't. You couldn't drive if they were, because we're going to get the arteries
And those
open.
of us of a certain age, some of us even remember 1967, where 2 weeks afterward, there was nothing moving in this city.
79.
And there has been, and by the way, Richard M. Daley, responsible more than anybody for this, there's been massive mission creep on Snow Command. I mean, every time there's a big snow, we jack up the expectations a little bit further. Now there's just absolute serious conversation about, well, we really need to start clearing the alleys too. And while we're at it, I think somebody ought to come and clear off my porch.
Well,
because I don't think I should have to sweep my porch.
Thing. I mean, every time we get this, they look at it and say, okay, now we're going to take it a step further. Did you know?
Right.
Did you know that the fire department had 50 snowmobiles?
I did. I saw a fluff piece on WGN about that.
Daley was really pleased that
it was
snowmobiles
the day
were there
before
to
the
have.
storm.
The day before. I didn't know that.
Yeah. All right, O'Hare expansion. Can we summarize this in a minute? What is going on with the meeting with American and United? Is this thing going to die when Daley leaves office?
I don't think so. I mean, you're seeing a big power play now, obviously, and the mayor pointed this out last week that he thinks they're trying to wait out his time in office.
Mm-hmm. It sure looks like they are.
It sure looks like it. Ray LaHood, of course, called them all together in Washington yesterday. I don't know that you're going to see a big breakthrough before Daley leaves.
Comes down to money.
It really, just keeping it on the table right now, I think, is I'm sure he would love to have some sort of a deal before he leaves, but this isn't going to go away. We know that capacity issues at O'Hare are going to continue to be an issue in the future.
Well, I mean, Mayor Daley bought and leveled most of Elk Grove Village and other surrounding communities.
Cemeteries and
there's just you drive down Irving Park Road and there's just nothing out there anymore.
I don't remember what the law is, but at one point, it may be in the Illinois legislature that if they default, that the state or the federal government will pick up the payments. Maybe that's behind the federal government's demand with the airlines to get this moving again.
All right, well, guys, I really appreciate it. It's been really fun talking to you today, and as always, these half hours go by so fast. Sam Hudzik from WBEZ FM, a political reporter there, and glad to have you, and I hope you come back many, many times. Dick Kay, I know it's a little bit of a hassle for you to get all the way into the city, but thank you so much for doing that, Dick. And Dick is on Saturday afternoons on WCPT, 8:20 a.m., with Back on the Beat, and also a longtime political guy at Channel 5. By the way, a piece of big news, as of this week, you can now get us as an audio podcast on iTunes. So if you want to hear our show, you can just listen to it and take it with you on your iPod. You can, of course, find us here on cable, 6:30 on Thursday nights. You can find us on Blip TV, blip.tv. You can check us out on iTunes as a video. There's just so many ways to watch us, so please do that. And you can watch these candidate forums every Sunday night at 5 o'clock here on CAN TV leading up to the election. There's a couple more of those to go. Thanks so much for joining us here on CAN TV. We'll see you next time. I'm Ken Davis, and thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom.